Books are like empathy machines, and they can do really magical things. And you can have like amazing conversations with children about really tough subjects sometimes by using a book.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I'm your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. There is a richness to the new children's book, like That Eleanor, The Amazing Power of Being an Ally, by writer Lee Wind and illustrator Kelly Mangan. There is a richness that affords a caregiver and a child a myriad opportunities for discussion, exploration, and ultimately connection. The book weaves history lessons with contemporary school scenarios that young children will recognize, and it does so in a way that entertains while modeling skills that young children need. I think that Lee and Kelly have created something special, and I was excited to get to talk to both of them about their process and what they want kids and adults to take away from the book. Talking About Kids is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. If this episode motivated you to read the book or to inspire the kids in your life to be allies, chances are it will motivate your friends and colleagues as well. So please like it and share it. And now, the interview.
I think it starts with me being a reader as a kid and never seeing anybody like me.
Mm.
I was this, timid, gay, closeted Jewish child of immigrants who just, had to constantly project myself in between the words, try to find, some connection. And I never found it. It was really, really almost nothing out there. And certainly nothing that would make me feel like I could have a successful life as a gay man. And I feel like a lot of what I do as an author is I'm trying to populate my internal child with the books that I didn't have, and I don't have a time machine to send them back to myself, so I sort of pay it forward, and I feel like I'm writing the books that would have changed my life had I had them when I was 6, when I was 11, when I was 15. Like that's sort of my mission. Like, and when I think about a project, I think, well, does this carry through with that line? Is this a book that would have impacted me and changed my life even a tiny bit when I was young?
Absolutely.
And Kelly, what about you? What got you interested and connected you with Lee around this book?
Well, I was Cardinal Rule reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in illustrating this book,
Mm.
and I said, they gave me sort of like the broad strokes of what it was, and I said that sounds interesting to me. Why don't you send the manuscript to my agent? We'll see. And I read the manuscript and I was like, frick yes. Like this is I really want to illustrate this. This is fantastic. Prior to writing and illustrating children's books, I before I had my kids, I was a union organizer and a community organizer. So
Oh, wow.
I love books that facilitate organizing, that teach kids about organizing, that teach kids about empathy, that encourage kids who have maybe never seen themselves in children's media before. So it was so up my alley that I was like, yes, I want this project.
And
So
and
yeah.
you both have a book of work, but today we're talking about the book entitled like That Eleanor, the amazing power of being an ally. And do Lee, did you have a personal connection with Eleanor Roosevelt? I mean, you've got a whole history to pick characters from. What is it about Eleanor Roosevelt that you wanted to bring her into this book?
I was doing research. So, as I said, I'm gay, and I was closeted from age 11 to age 25. And um, in my early 30s, I was sort of like still kind of being a teenager. I promise this cul-de-sac has a
Mm.
message. So I went to like a camp, a weekend camp for gay men, and there was like lectures and classes, and it was almost like reclaiming your inner child kind of thing. And one of the people gave a talk about the letters that Abraham Lincoln wrote to Joshua Fry Speed that convinced him that Abraham Lincoln was in love with Joshua Fry Speed. And I was like, how is that possible? I've
Mm.
never heard of this. But
Mhm.
it got me down that rabbit hole, right? And I was like, oh my gosh. And I got the books from the library, and I read the letters, and I also became convinced that Abraham was in love with Joshua. And then I started to think like, well, maybe there are other stories, and I started to collect them. And over the years, I started collecting the stories of sort of like pretty famous people that were men in love with men, or women in love with women, or people who love without regard to gender. And among those stories was Eleanor Roosevelt, because Eleanor Roosevelt, even though she was married to FDR, while she was first lady, she had this, she started this decades long love affair with
Yeah.
another woman, Lorena Hickok. And I'd never heard that. And I was like, what? And there's this beautiful book of their letters that are published. And I am convinced that they were in love, romantic love. And it was very exciting. And then I was working on a nonfiction book for kids age 11 and up called No Way They Were Gay. Eleanor Roosevelt's actually on the cover of it, as is Abraham Lincoln. And when I was doing that research, I just kept getting more and more amazed at these stories of allyship that like she didn't have to, right? Eleanor Roosevelt didn't have to do any of this. Before her, first ladies were sort of like
Yeah.
hostesses. That was their gig. But like she got into the White House and pretty much inspired by Lorena, who was the first woman to have a byline on the front page of the New York Times. She was a reporter, she had her own career. Like Eleanor transformed what being a first lady meant. And one of her first things that she did is that at the time, when her husband became president, there were press conferences that the president gave, and they only allowed men reporters to go, and she wasn't pleased with that. So she couldn't upend the apple cart, right? Like she wasn't aggressive in that way. She didn't fight to have women admitted to her husband's press conferences. That might have been too hard to achieve. She was very clever. So as an ally, what she did is she decided she was going to start having her own weekly briefings for press, but only allow women reporters to
Yeah.
attend, which forced all these news outlets to hire women reporters. And that moment, that was so clever. And then I got really into it. And so in the book for older readers, there are all these great examples of the allyship. And I was sort of sitting with that, and I wasn't sure where I just was like, wow, that's so cool. And then that was the sort of like the groundwork
Right.
for this story, because I was really I want kids to feel empowered. And there are so many unfair things in this world, and as adults sometimes we want to protect our kids from that, but we can't. There's so much unfairness.
Yeah.
And if we pretend there isn't, that's not empowering our kids. That's sort of like, that's not helping. So I was trying to play with these two different ideas, like, how do you let a kid know that they actually can do something, they have agency when they see unfair things happening. And then I had these stories about Eleanor Roosevelt being an ally, and eventually they sort of coalesced and became our very quirky, wacky picture book about a young girl named after Eleanor Roosevelt who sees unfair things happening and doesn't know what to do, and is inspired by the stories her two dads tell her about Eleanor Roosevelt to figure out how she can stand up, how she can be an ally.
I also love the fact that, the takeaway from this book is that you don't have to know the perfect thing to do, because that's such a universal experience. I find that is true with adults as well, that they will see something unfair, and in the moment they don't do anything because they don't know how to respond. And I think people get hung up on like, oh, I have to have the perfect thing to say,
Yeah.
when really it just saying anything in the moment, I think, can be helpful. I mean, if somebody's at your workplace is telling an inappropriate joke, you don't have to like have a treatise prepared on like all the ways that this joke is like not cool. You could just be like, "Ooh, that's not cool," and just react in the moment. Uh, and even that has a big impact. It's far better than just letting it slide without doing anything.
I have this thing that I've been thinking a lot about, which is that there really isn't such a thing as a silent ally.
Mm.
Like if I'm an ally only in my head, that's not helping. That means I'm actually a bystander. And I feel like, and it doesn't have to even be in the moment, right? Like, I mean, you can call people in rather than calling them out. And I actually found in my life that calling people in is way more effective at actually getting to change, because people don't really like being called out when they're when they're wrong or when they've overstepped. But if you can do it from a place of kindness, if you can approach it as a friend, sometimes when I don't know what to do, I approach a friend that I want to help, a friend that is experiencing something unfair, and I say, how can I be an ally to you? How can I help? What would you like to see?
This wouldn't be an episode of Talking About Kids if I didn't bring in the research that all of you are talking about, actually, because this is deep in the science of things like bullying. That
Mhm.
one of the reasons why bystanders don't intervene is that they don't know what to do and that they imagine that the intervention has to be a conflict.
Mhm.
And what we know, for example, again, in particular from the bullying literature, is that the conflict is actually going to make something worse. That if you can intervene in a different way, if you can change the context of what's happening rather than confronting the bully, you're going to be much more successful, to your point, Lee. And one of the things that I really like about this book is that the tensions, the unfairness that the character Eleanor witnesses is very real. These aren't these big, it doesn't start out with these really big issues. It starts out with things that we know, again, from the research, kids face every day. Girls being told that they can't play a sport on the playground. Boys being told by girls that they can't, play with dolls or play house on the playground or knit with them. Your characters in this book are knitters. I'm going to let people know that. So I really appreciate that you went for what I have to believe are things that resonate with your readers. So in illustrating them, tell me a little bit, Kelly, about what did Lee tell you he wanted this to look like?
Well, it's funny. Lee and I were talking about this the other day. That generally in the process of illustrating picture books, at the start, the author and the illustrator don't typically have a lot of contact. All of the
Okay.
contact tends to be through the art director, through the editor. And I think, like Lee had said, the reason for that is they do want the illustrator to sort of interpret the story on their own, and not to be led too much, by the author's vision. And also, the art director is obviously going to have some input
Right.
and some thoughts as well. So we actually did not have a whole lot of contact. What I was told by the um, art director and the editor was, we want there to be diversity in the book,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and Eleanor Roosevelt is a huge part of it, so she has to look correct. So that was sort of, I was given kind of free reign, um, besides those two things. So I tried to bring in diversity, not just in terms of racial diversity and also religious diversity, but like one of the characters has a cochlear implant,
Mm-hmm.
um, because my partner has a cochlear implant, so I wanted to include that as well. One of the characters is fat. As someone who is fat myself, I like to see body diversity in a lot of different ways in children's literature. So I just kind of went to town.
And one of the, if I could just interject, one of the beautiful things that Kelly did is you incorporated sort of non-binary colors,
Yeah,
right? The pride
Hmm.
colors. It's like, because what one of the main things is that the child Eleanor in the story is trying to figure out how can she be an ally to this friend
right.
of hers in the class who is non-binary. And I mean, Kelly, you brought so much to it. It was so exciting to see, like the whole knitting thing.
You.
That wasn't me. That was all Kelly.
Thank you. I really, so the knitting thing, I guess it's technically crocheting, because people who are like really into crocheting would rake me across the
Oh, that's
coals
right. There's a
if
hook,
I,
isn't there? There's a
yes,
crochet hook. Now that you say that, I remember. Okay. Okay.
but
It's crocheting, listeners,
it's
not knitting.
crochet. But Eleanor Roosevelt, as I was doing research for the book, I noticed a lot of photographs of her at meetings, knitting.
Oh,
And in
wow.
fact, her White House like portrait, it's a bust of her, and then it's her hand with her wedding band on it, and then it's her hands knitting, and then her hands like holding her glasses. So the artist Douglas Chandor, I believe you say his name, um, felt that the knitting was integral to her personality to such a degree that he had to capture it in her official portrait. So I liked that connection, and I thought I would uh, give young Eleanor a similar hobby, um, because I wanted her to have
Yeah.
something to share and to teach the other kids that she was bringing into her circle. And I just, as a somebody who's into textile art, I like to weave on a loom, so I sort of love the symbolism of bringing different threads of things together to create something new. So that was sort of why you'll see a lot of textiles. The kids are
Right.
doing knitting, and also I slapped plaids all over this thing because I never met a plaid I didn't like. I probably need an intervention. Uh, it's so stereotypical, but yes, I love plaids.
Well, and the connection in modern protest between knitting and modern resistance and counter movements. That's where I thought that was coming. I thought you were making that connection. It's interesting to hear how you treated diversity, because one of the things that struck me, again, I'm fortunate in that I get sent a lot of children's picture books, and I think the modal way to address othering is that there is a character that is different from all of the other characters, and the story is about how they address that. Right.
Mhm.
In your book, the aesthetic of it, the characters that populate it, are all individuals. And I
Mhm.
think that what is nice, at least how I read it, what I took away from it was is that we're all unique. That we all have things that make us special, or might sometimes make us stand out, but that also might mean make us have that thing that connects with somebody else. So, to me, I just want to let you know it didn't come across as, oh, there is this one character who's different. It was quite the opposite.
Good.
Again, it was like, we're all unique. We all have these special things. So, Lee, what was your reaction when you saw her drawings for the first time?
It's always the most exciting moment of being a picture book author is seeing how the illustrator brings it to life. I mean, it was very important to me that, Eleanor has two dads because my husband and I, we've been together almost 28 years. We have a daughter. At this point, she's 21, so like just in time. Uh, but there were that when I was growing up, there were no representations of two
Right.
dad families. And even when my daughter was growing up, I think there were like two books that had, two dad families represented. So that this is my first picture book with the two dad family is really important. But like one of the very opening spreads is one of the dads with Eleanor sort of being really supportive, and they're like almost touching noses, and it's just the love emanating from that spread. I mean, when I saw that, Kelly, I was just, oh,
Oh.
I was so moved and I was so happy because I didn't want it to be about, oh, this girl has two dads and this is an issue book. That wasn't the
Hmm.
book. This is like she is loved and they are a family and she is dealing with something and her parents try to help, but her parents don't solve the issue for her. And
Hmm.
I didn't want the book to feel didactic.
Yeah.
It's not a preaching sermon. It is just sort of like, there's a great quote by Anne Lamott. I say it a lot. She's talking in the book Bird by Bird, and she's talking about how lighthouses don't run all over an island looking for boats to save. They just stand
Mm.
there
Yeah.
and they shine. And I think about that for all of my books. Like, I don't have to convince anybody of anything. I just want to shine the light on this really cool thing. And, you know, if people want to come to the light, great. And if they don't, that's not my problem. It's not my issue,
Hmm.
right? I want the book to shine. And with Kelly's beautiful art and making these characters seem so real, I think it does. And we get to have this bonus of like this, like we learn a little bit about Eleanor Roosevelt, but we're
Yeah.
also like seeing a kid today dealing with an issue that kids are dealing with. There
Hmm.
is unfairness, and there are non-binary and queer identified young people,
Hmm.
and you know, they are not being treated with dignity and respect as humans, and they should be. And we maybe can't change the whole world, but if we can change a little piece of it, if we can make someone, one other person feel supported, feel loved. I mean, there, you were talking about the research, Brad. We know like one supportive adult
Oh, yeah.
can make a huge difference
Hmm.
in outcomes for a child that feels alone and isolated. And the fact that kids will be able to see this book and encounter it and feel less alone and feel empowered, that's amazing.
You know,
I,
Kel,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, well, I was going to ask you, since, Lee has shared what representation means to him, seeing
Mm.
families that look like his families, finding characters that are like him.
Mhm.
Um, you had mentioned wanting to create these characters that you hadn't seen. You had
Mhm.
mentioned your partner has a cochlear implant, but
Mhm.
besides that, like, why do you think representation in literature is important?
Well, there, besides the seeing ourselves reflected, right, which I also relate to, because I was a fat kid growing up,
Mm,
and now I'm a fat adult. And even still, excuse me, even still in children's media, we do see fat bodies used as a shorthand for negative attributes.
yeah,
So it's very rare that you'll see a fat character that isn't either the bully or the comic relief, like the dumb character, like they're meant to be unintelligent and lazy and greedy and all of the negative attributes. So in television, in
right.
literature, still we see that, and that was something that really made me want to start writing and illustrating children's books specifically. But I also think it's important for non marginalized kids to see that representation and to be exposed to different sorts of people, different bodies, different ways of living, different ways of having a family, because this is how we build empathy.
Yeah,
And it's how children begin to learn that they're not the center of the world. Like they can be the center of their parents' world, and they should be. That's great. But if you're like, for example, a white cis het boy, and you only ever read stories or see stories where the main character is a white cishet boy, what is that going to do to your perception of the world? And what is that going to teach you about other people's role in the world and how you treat them? So I think it's vitally important, for marginalized kids to see themselves reflected, but also for non marginalized kids to see other people's realities reflected.
right. Well, and I never know. I think listeners are going to get sick of me saying this. I never know how much to give away about a book when I'm talking about it, but these are books for children, and my listeners decidedly aren't children. So I don't feel as bad about giving pieces away, although I really do want my listeners to pick up this book and, be surprised and excited and find joy in the way that I did. You are both alluding to the fact that there is a moment in this book when Eleanor, the main character, really has to stand up for one of her classmates, Star,
Mhm.
who isn't identifying as male, might be identifying as female. We don't know, I don't think, as the reader, but we know that there doesn't seem to be a place for a star when it comes to, for in particular, which restroom to use. But what I want everybody to know, though, is Eleanor's kind of progress as an ally starts with far simpler things. She is just seeing people treated unfairly across the board. And I have already given a couple of those examples of just a girl being told she can't play sports with the boys on the playground. A character presenting as female can't play with the characters presenting as male. So it is, I appreciate that you both are talking about some of the aspects that have to do with identity. But I think that at its core, this is about how a child deals with just all sorts of unfairness and where they find the inspiration and the kind of interventions that are going to work for them. So I just want to mention that because obviously I think the identity issues are incredibly, incredibly important. But this applies if you've got a kid in your life that is seeing something like some kids being excluded from games, some kids not getting picked for a team, some
Right.
kids, not being allowed to sit with others at meal times. This is a book that will help that kid find their own strategies for how to be that ally. So it's not just about identity issues, even though those are incredibly, incredibly important. Is it fair that I'm saying that, Lee? I don't want to, this is your book and I'm just a reader.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's our book now that Kelly has made it hers
Right.
as well.
It's both of your books, you're right. So.
I think that is very fair. I think that the idea that you can be an ally in many ways. I mean, one of the beautiful through lines of the book that I think that Kelly really managed to help kids understand is that with each page turn, with each experience of seeing something unfair, Eleanor's collecting friends throughout the story too.
Yeah.
Like somebody experiences something unfair and Eleanor doesn't know what to do, but Eleanor becomes friends with them and they become part of Eleanor's circle. And that is a magical thing that's happening with the page turn, right? And as the book is progressing and as Eleanor is seeing all these unfair things, the circle of Eleanor's friendships is growing and growing and growing. And, a bit of a spoiler alert, but by the end, the circle has grown to include everyone. And that sort of subtextual message, I think, is really beautiful. And for the adults listening, I mean, like, you probably know, like, if a picture book is resonant, then you're going to end up reading it with the kid a lot. It's not just that first read. It's there's a comfort. You feel like you have friends in the story and you want to revisit it. And hopefully it's short enough that parents and caregivers won't be like, oh gosh, we have to read that book again. I hope it's a joy. And I think that there's so much in those, there's so much unsaid too. There's so much quiet things to discover in the story too, that makes me really happy.
So I'm going to now address, in case it doesn't seem like we've addressed complicated things, I'm going to now want to address one of the more complicated issues here. And that is this idea of being an ally. In recent years, we've had a lot of really smart activists kind of debating this issue of what an ally is, who gets to have that label, how it should be used, whether or not we want allies, what allies do. All of this is being actively debated in multiple communities right now. So how are you defining ally? And again, I think I'll start with Lee. Lee, how are you defining ally?
I think it's really important that an ally doesn't speak for someone who is experiencing something unfair. An ally sort of stands with them. And if they, it was very important to make sure that Eleanor doesn't speak for Star, that Star is asking for Eleanor to, even though it's nonverbal, like there are these moments where it's like, you don't want to step in as a person with some privilege in a moment and like suck up all the oxygen in the room, right? Yeah. Like it's not about you, it's about you being there for someone else. And sometimes you have to ask, like, how can I help? And sometimes you're going to hear stuff that maybe you don't want to hear. Like maybe guess what? It's not about you. It's an unfair thing
Yeah.
that happened to somebody else. But one of the things that I think is so true is that Bayard Rustin, he was a black gay civil rights leader, and he actually taught Martin Luther King Jr. about nonviolent protest, and he organized the famous March on Washington in 1963, where Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech. Bayard was interviewed later in his life in 1986, and he was asked, does he have any advice for young black gay activists? And he said, yeah, I do. You should be, hold on, I actually have the quote right here. The most important thing I have to say is that they should try to build coalitions of people for the elimination of all injustice. Because if we want to do away with the injustice to gays, it will not be done because we get rid of the injustice to gays. It will be done because we are forwarding the effort for the elimination of injustice to all. And we will win the rights for gays or blacks or Hispanics or women within the context of whether we are fighting for all. I mean, I would crochet that if I knew how to crochet. Like I love that so much, and it feels like that could have been said yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have to stand up for all of us, and when we do, we can change the world.
I think that's such a important part of all of this, Lee, is people recognizing that their stake is tied up with other people's stakes, right? You know, women, queer people are not going to be free independently of like other oppressions. That's just not the way it works. And so I think I understand a lot of the criticisms of, allyship as like a term. And, I'm certainly very wary to declare myself an ally to some group whose marginalization I do not share because, frankly, it feels a little presumptuous.
Mm.
Um, and I do think sometimes people treat, especially in our social media culture, they treat allyship like it's a stamp of approval. Like I am certified unproblematic. Um, so, and that's just not true of any of us. We all stumble, we all make mistakes, and when we do, it's on us to get up and try and do better next time, and to learn to do better next time. But I don't know that I'd ever go so far as to say, don't call yourself an ally, because there are situations where I think it actually is helpful. Like, for example, if you are a teacher or a service provider and you're wearing like an LGBTQIA ally pin, or you have a sign up in your classroom or something, especially in the current political climate, doing that is taking a small professional risk, or depending on where you are, maybe a large professional risk, in order to let queer kids know that you are there for them and that you're a
Yeah.
safe person for them. And that's no small thing. So, yeah, I wouldn't ever say like, don't refer to yourself as an ally, but I will say, I think it's a good thing to be self-reflective and to, if you're going to declare yourself an ally, to ask yourself, like, why? Like, what's the reason for doing that? Is there a purpose, a helpful purpose for it? Or is it just because, you feel like getting social media cookies or,
Right.
but yeah, all of us should be striving to be good allies in our daily lives. But yeah, I also don't think that we really get to decide if we succeed at that or not.
Maybe we should think of ally as a verb rather than a noun. Maybe
I
it's
like that.
an ally is something we do. And
That's
then
right.
other people can worry about the labels, but like, what are
Hmm.
you doing? How are you helping?
Yeah,
There's that great
absolutely.
Mr. Rogers quote that people are always, and then there was this whole kerfuffle about like whether it was good or bad. But like, if when times are terrible, like look for the helpers. And I think that's
Hmm.
a great message for children, but for the adults, it's like, okay, step up, be a helper.
Be the helper. Yeah,
Well, those
absolutely.
were two very thoughtful responses. And I expected as much because you've put together an incredibly thoughtful book. And one of the
Oh,
things that I really appreciate about it is that you intentionally thought about the dynamic between the reader and the listener. And you included instructions for before reading, for during reading, and for after reading for the reader to do. Why include those things? Why was that important to you, Lee?
Oh, I struggled with the during reading actually,
Mm,
because what I said to the publisher was that, wait a minute, I don't want them stopping in the middle of the story and like having a conversation. And
right.
then they reminded me that like, well, actually, people read these picture books many, many times. So, okay, imagine on the second read, what would these questions be? And that kind of unlocked it for me. Um, I I think books are like empathy machines, and
Mm,
they can do really magical things, and you can have like amazing conversations with children about really tough subjects sometimes by using a book. And not so much in terms of, so I have a friend who teaches kindergarten, and she talks a lot about like her job as a teacher isn't to directionally deliver information. She talks about her job as like her job is to surface the wisdom that's already in the room,
Hmm,
which I think is so beautiful. And I think that, we don't always have to have the answers as adults, but if we can engage children in a meaningful conversation around something like a book, that can be very powerful, and that can help a child expand their worldview and their ideas about what is possible.
Well,
absolutely.
when the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics put out a recommendation for how much time should be spent reading to the child every day, they weren't concerned about literacy. That's not their role, right? What they knew is that that time spent with the book was an opportunity to create a relationship, to create a bond between humans, which is, again, the building block of resilience. When both of you were talking about allyship, um, I thought, and this is going to be cheesy, but I'm not above that. I want to end with one of you telling me, or telling the listeners rather, um, about the tattoo that one of Eleanor's dads has. And what does that tattoo say?
Okay, well, Lee, you go ahead because you wrote that into your manuscript. So,
I did. I thought it was very brave to have a character have a tattoo. It's not the first book to have a character with a tattoo. Um, so it became, I was trying to figure out, how do I take this amazing quote from Eleanor Roosevelt and somehow get it in the book? And I was like, what if one of the dads has it as a tattoo? And then, Kelly, you totally sold it. So the quote is, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights.
I want to thank you both so much for writing this book, and I look forward to reading and seeing what both of you do in the future. And I hope that everybody listening to this picks up a copy of Like That Eleanor, the amazing power of being an ally. Thank you so much for being on Talking About Kids.
Thank
thanks
you
for
for the
having us.
opportunity.
That was Lee Wind and illustrator Kelly Mangan. More information about Lee and Kelly and their book, Like That Eleanor, The Amazing Power of Being an Ally, is at talkingaboutkids.com. And when you do visit talkingaboutkids.com, send me a note. Let me know what you think. I read every bit of feedback. The Talking About Kids theme song is by the Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans. And the difference is that young goats are much easier to manage.